Chapter 6. Flow. On the way to Tai Chi practice, Mara couldn't get the image out of her head. Geralt, standing there, calm as stone, untouchable as a god. She'd scrolled past it on her phone 3 times before she finally watched just a 30-second clip, grainy and shaking. Filmed from somewhere in the crowd, the footage had spread like wildfire overnight, passed from feed to feed, until it was inescapable, breaking news, viral, trending worldwide with hashtags that made her stomach turn. Divine judgment, some called it, proof of God's favor. Murder, others said, though those voices were getting quieter, drowned out by the roar of the faithful. The pyromancer had thrown everything he had, a wall of fire so bright the camera whited out, the audio crackling with the roar of superheated air, the kind of heat that should have melted stone, vaporized flesh, turned a human being into ash and memory. For 3 seconds, maybe 4, Geralt disappeared entirely behind the inferno. The cameraman had screamed something shock or terror, impossible to tell which. Then the flames died, and he was still standing, untouched, perfect, white suit pristine, blonde hair gleaming like spun gold, not even a smudge of ash, not a bead of sweat on his forehead, like the fire had been nothing more than a gentle breeze, like physics itself had looked at him and decided the rules didn't apply. Then the sound, one deafening shot, crisp and final, cutting through the lingering smoke like the voice of God himself. The gunshot had made her flinch even through her phone screen, the sound visceral in a way that transcended digital reproduction, clean, precise, inevitable. The pyromancer fell, young face so young, barely older than her, going slack with incomprehension, trying to understand what had happened in the second before understanding stopped mattering. Before everything stopped mattering, silence followed, the kind that pressed against your ears, heavy and suffocating, the kind that felt like the world holding its breath. Then the cheering started. Mara had wanted to scream, to throw her phone against the wall, to break something, to do anything that would make the sick feeling in her gut go away. But instead, she just kept walking, the video looping in her mind with every step. The flames, the untouched prophet, the shot, the body hitting the pavement, the celebration. Over and over and over, she'd watched it 7 times before forcing herself to stop. 7 times watching a kid die for the crime of being different. 7 times watching thousands of people celebrate it. 7 times wondering if there would be a someday if she'd slip up, if someone would see her powers, if a crowd would gather to watch her burn. By the time she reached the park, her hands were still trembling. The morning air was cool and damp, the kind that smelled fatally of rain and ash, a strange mix of peace and the violence she just witnessed. It was the smell of the new world, she realized. Clean air and destruction, nature and apocalypse, all twisted together until you couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. Mist clung to the grass like living things, shifting and coiling with each breath of wind. The sun was only beginning to burn through the grey sky, pale and tentative, as if uncertain whether it should bother rising on a world like this. The far corner of the park, where Masterly stood, felt separate from the rest of the city, quieter, sacred almost, like there was an invisible membrane between here and there, between the chaos of the streets and this pocket of stillness. A few joggers passed on the main path, earbuds in, oblivious. A homeless man slept on a bench near the entrance, bundled in layers despite the mild temperature. A woman walked her dog, some small, fluffy thing that yapped at shadows. Normal people doing normal things, pretending the world wasn't ending in slow motion all around them. Master Liu was already there, moving through his formed with deliberate slowness. His movements flowed like water across stone, unhurried, inevitable, perfectly controlled, each gesture precise but never rigid, powerful but never forced. He looked ancient in the morning light, his withered face carved with lines that spoke of decades, maybe centuries, of practice, of knowledge accumulated and refined until it became instinct. His eyes opened just long enough to acknowledge her arrival. A brief flicker of recognition, then closed again. No greeting, no comment on her being 2 minutes late or the dark circles under her eyes. Just that momentary acknowledgement that said, "You're here. That's enough. Begin." No words, just breathe. Mara stepped beside him, dropping her bag by the bench with a soft thud. She closed her eyes and tried to find the stillness she touched yesterday, that faint current of Kai that had responded to her breathing. That sense of something moving beneath her skin, through channels she was only beginning to sense, and she waited. The hiss came almost immediately, soft at first, like wind through dry leaves, like sand shifting in an hourglass, then sharper, more insistent, going through her chest like smoke seeping through cracks in a wall. A snake. She could feel it again, not outside her, not separate and foreign, but inside, deep in her bones, curling around her spine like it belonged there, whispering beneath her skin in a language she didn't have words for but somehow understood on a level deeper than thought. Asterisk move asterisk, it seemed to say. Asterisk flow. This is what you are. This is what you are always meant to be. Dot asterisk. For once, she didn't fight it. She'd fought it the first time in the alley, where it had taken over completely and transformed her into something not quite human. She'd fought it when kissing Liana, when the jealous hiss had torn through the moment and ruined everything. She'd fought it every time it whispered in her thoughts, treating it like an invader, an infection, something to be resisted and controlled. But this morning, exhausted from watching that video on loop, from the nightmares that had jerked her awake 3 times, from the constant fear that had been her companion since the night she'd grabbed that crystal, she was too tired to fight. She let go. Her body began to move, not because she told it to, not because she was copying Liu's forms or remembering Liana's instructions from days ago. Her muscles found their own rhythm, guided by something deeper than thought, older than language. Her arms rose and fell in slow arcs, tracing invisible paths through the cool morning air. Paths that felt written into her DNA, inherited from something ancient and patient and utterly inhuman. Her feet shifted with instinct rather than reason, weight transferring smoothly from one leg to the other, rooted and fluid at once. Contradictions that somehow made sense when she stopped trying to make sense of them. Solid but flowing, grounded but weightless, strong but yielding. She wasn't doing Tai Chi anymore. It was doing her. The hiss rolled through every movement, no longer menacing or intrusive but supportive, instructive. It was a pulse, a breath, a heartbeat that wasn't quite her own but was becoming hers with every passing second. The snake's rhythm, syncing with her heartbeat, teaching her body what her mind couldn't grasp. This wasn't the basic form Liu had shown her yesterday, those simple foundational movements meant for beginners. This was something older, something she couldn't name but felt written into her very bones. Instinct, memory, evolution. Her spine curved in ways that should have been uncomfortable, almost painful, but felt natural as breathing. Her shoulders rolled forward, creating a predatory hunch. Her hands moved in spirals rather than circles, fingers curled like they were testing invisible textures in the air. Each movement flowed into the next with serpentine grace. No breaks, no pauses, just continuous coiling and uncoiling. This was something different, something that felt older than the basic forms Liu had taught her. Her movements became predatory, instinctive, the way a hunter moved through grass unseen, the way something patient and dangerous waited for exactly the right moment to strike. She could feel the difference in how her weight distributed. In regular Tai Chi, you stayed grounded, stable, powerful. In this, whatever this was, she felt like water finding the path of least resistance, low to the ground, ready to slip away or strike forward with equal ease, dangerous in ways she didn't fully understand yet. Then a touch, gentle, barely there, masked Liu's hand that, like as falling rain, adjusted her stance, a slight shift of her hip to lower her center of gravity further, a minute correction to the angle of her wrist, turning her palm to face down instead of forward. Each adjustment so subtle she almost didn't notice, but immediately the flow improved, became smoother, more natural, and his hand was gone, and she was alone again in the flow. He didn't speak, didn't explain what he corrected or why. Just let her find the rest herself, trusting that her body would understand even if her mind didn't, trusting the snake to teach her what centuries of human instruction couldn't. Time became elastic. Seconds stretched into minutes or maybe hours, she couldn't tell anymore. The world narrowed to brief and movement, to the sensation of ki spiraling through channels she was only beginning to sense. Meridians, Liu had called them once. Pathways that connected everything, that let energy flow from one part of the body to another, that made her more than just a collection of separate parts but a unified system, a circuit, a living flow. The snake's presence wasn't separate from her now. It was her, or she was becoming it, the line between them blurring with every exhale. She could feel its patience, the ability to stay perfectly still for hours, waiting for the right moment. Its awareness sensing vibrations through the ground, tracking heat through the air, knowing where prey was without seeing it. Its confidence, absolute certainty that when it struck, it would connect. These weren't human traits, but they were becoming hers, and another scent reached her through the morning air, cutting through her trance like a knife. Lavender and iron, flowers and blood, softness and violence. Liana, Mara could feel her presence even before footsteps whispered across the grass. The faint shimmer of power that clung to Liana like a second skin, like heat distortion rising from hot pavement. The way the air seemed to bend slightly around her, reality making room for someone who could reshape flesh and bone with a thought. But Mara didn't open her eyes. didn't break the flow to process the complicated tangle of emotions that came with that presence, the love and hurt, and anger and longing all mixed together into something she had no name for. Not now, not yet. She stayed focused, breathing, moving, following the snake's guidance deeper into the form that he'd show her things she couldn't have discovered on her own. Trusty it, even as part of her still wondered if trust was wise. Lyanna's footsteps stopped somewhere to her left, close enough to be part of the practice space but far enough to maintain respectful distance. A pause, a moment of observation, then the soft rustle of fabric as she settled into a stance of her own, joining them without asking permission or announcing herself. Just slipping into the shared space like she always been there. Now there were 3 of them, Liu, Lyanna, and Mara, their breathing gradually synchronizing into one sound, one rhythm, like an orchestra finding harmony, like separate instruments becoming a unified piece. The air between them seemed to thicken with shared energy, flowing in currents that connected them even as they moved through different forms. Liu continued his basic Tai Chi, the public style anyone could learn, movements so refined they looked effortless, each gesture the distillation of thousands of hours of practice, of decades of teaching, of a lifetime devoted to perfecting the fundamentals, simple but profound, obvious but mysterious, the kind of mastery that looked easy precisely because it was so difficult. Lyanna mirrored him, doing the same foundational forms, nothing clan-specific, nothing that would reveal what she truly was to anyone watching. Just an old man and a young woman practicing in the park, the way thousands of people did in cities across the world. Unremarkable, forgettable, safe, but Mara moved differently. Her form was fluid but serpentine, each motion coiling and uncoiling like a snake, navigating through water. Her spine curved in ways that shouldn't have been comfortable but felt natural, necessary. Her arms moved in spirals rather than circles, and her steps were low and gliding, weight-shifting with predatory grace. Every movement spoke of patience and sudden violence, of the ability to wait forever and strike in an instant. She didn't know what she was doing. She just knew it felt right. Felt like coming home to a place she'd never been but had always belonged. Time folded in on itself. For a moment that felt like hours. There was no courtyard, no city, no world burning with violence and holy war, no video of a kid dying, no fear of discovery, no uncertainty about the future, only flow, only the 3 of them moving together, separate but unified, different forms expressing the same fundamental truth, Kai flowing like water, like breath, like the current beneath all living things. Mara lost herself in it completely. The consciousness drifted, no longer anchored to the usual landmarks of identity and awareness. She was moving, but she wasn't directing the movement. She was breathing, but the breath was breathing her. She was present, but she wasn't there. Paradoxes that stopped being contradictions when you stopped thinking about them. The snake taught her things without words, how to sense vibrations through her feet, not just footsteps, but heartbeats, breathing, the micro-tremors of living things, how to smell fear and confidence, how they had different chemical signatures on the air, how to be so still that prey enemies wouldn't notice her until it was too late. Predator knowledge, hunter's wisdom, things that should have horrified her but didn't, things that felt less like corruption and more like reclamation, like remembering a part of humanity that civilization had tried to bury but never quite eliminated. Then gradually it began to ebb. The snake's presence receded, slipping back into the quiet places inside her chest where it lived. The hiss faded to a whisper, then to silence. The heightened awareness dimmed, the world returning to normal dimensions and colors and sounds. The park was solidified around her, grass and trees and distant traffic, jolters and dogs and the ordinary chaos of morning. Mara's arms came to rest at her sides, her breathing slow, evening out from the deep, powerful rhythm of practice to something more normal, more human. Her eyes opened. She blinked against the morning light, now brighter, the mist mostly burned away by the climbing sun. For a moment she felt disoriented, as if she'd been somewhere far away, not physically but spiritually, mentally, and had just returned to find herself standing in the same spot she'd started, like waking from a dream so vivid it took a moment to remember which reality was real. Before her stood Master Liu and Lyanna, both settling into stillness. Their postures were identical, weight balanced perfectly over their centers, hands resting at their sides, spines straight but relaxed, as if she were looking at 2 reflections of the same truth expressed in different bodies, different ages, different lives. Liu's eyes opened and met hers. He said nothing. He rarely said anything, but something passed between them. Recognition, maybe, or acknowledgement, a sense that he'd seen what she'd done, understood what it meant, and approved, or at least didn't disapprove. With Liu, it was hard to tell. His silence could mean anything. Liana stood with her eyes still closed, breathing slowly, the faint shimmer of her power barely visible in the morning light like heat waves rising. She looked peaceful, centered, more at ease than Mara had seen her in months, not since before she'd left, before the year of silence and separation. Like practicing here, in this space, with these people, let her set down burdens she normally carried alone, and for the first time since the hissing began, since that night in the alley when everything changed, when something happened that she still didn't understand, Mara didn't feel afraid. She didn't feel broken or cursed or wrong. Didn't feel like a monster or an abomination or any of the things Geralt's followers would call her if they knew what she was becoming. She felt whole, different, yes, changed, absolutely, of complete in a way she hadn't been before, like a puzzle piece that had always been slightly wrong fitting into place for the first time. Mara grabbed her bag and sat down on the bench, at the edge of the clearing. The wood was cool beneath her palms, still damp with morning dew that soaked into her leggings, making them cling uncomfortably to her thighs. She took a long sip from her water bottle, the liquid cooled enough to make her teeth ache. Eyes still fixed on the two figures in front of her. Liu and Liana moved in perfect sync now, fluid, controlled, every motion an echo of breath. Liu's movements were economical, refined by decades of practice until they looked effortless. Nothing wasted, nothing excessive, just pure distilled motion stripped of everything unnecessary. Liana matched him step for step, her form equally precise, mirroring his economy of movement. 2 generations, 2 lives, 1 practice. The world around them seemed to fade again, sound thinning to nothing but the slow rhythm of their inhaling and exhaling. The distant traffic became white noise. The birds in the trees would quiet, as if they could sense something sacred happening and knew better than to interrupt. Even the wind itself seemed to still, the air growing heavy and expectant. Mara found herself breathing with them without thinking about it. In, out, her chest rose and fell, syncing with their rhythm like a third instrument. Joining a duet, the air moved through her lungs with a weight she'd never noticed before, cool on the inhale, carrying the scent of grass and morning, warm on the exhale, releasing something she couldn't name, carrying something more than just oxygen. Kai maybe, or just awareness. She wasn't sure there was a difference anymore. Master Liu had said once that breath was everything, that it was the bridge between body and spirit, the thread that tied the soul to the world. Without breath, there is no life, he'd said in his rough, accented English. Without awareness of breath, there is no control. Without control, there is no power. The words had sounded simple, almost obvious, but like everything Liu said, it contained depths she was only beginning to plumb. She hadn't understood it then. The words had sounded like the kind of mystical fortune cookie wisdom that Tai Chi masters were supposed to say, the kind of thing that sounded profound but didn't actually mean anything concrete. Eastern philosophy reduced to platitudes, but now, sitting there with her pulse still humming from the strange trance of movement, with the memory of the snake's guidance still coiled warm in her chest, she did understand. Breath wasn't just oxygen exchange, it was attention. Intention, the mechanism by which will became reality, by which thought became power. Every breath was a choice, a direction, a shaping of the energy that flowed through all things. If she was going to survive in this ever-devolving world, this place where men like Geralt could walk through fire untouched and execute people on livestream, where monsters crawled out of portals and tore families apart, where the purity movement burned awakened in the streets like medieval witches, she needed that breath to become instinct, not a thought, not a technique she had to remember. A reflex, something she was rather than something she did. Her chest rose and fell, steady, quiet, inevitable. The air felt heavy and all dense with something she couldn't name. Memory, maybe, intent, the weight of everything she'd survived and everything still coming. She let the rhythm wash through her until the faint trembling in her hands stilled her from watching the video, from seeing that body drop, from imagining it could have been her finally faded. She was calmer now, centered. The fear was still there. She doubted it would ever fully leave, but it was manageable, controllable, a tool rather than a master. When Liu and Liana finally stopped, they bowed to each other, a gesture of mutual respect, hands pressed together at chest level, a slight forward bend from the waist, the kind of bow that acknowledged the other person's humanity and skill, that said, "I see you, I honor you, thank you for practicing with me." Liu lingered only a moment before turning back to his starting position and beginning the form again from the first movement, as though the cycle never truly ended, as though he could do this forever, would do this forever, moving through the same patterns until the sun burned out and the world ended, and even then his ghost would still be here, still flowing through the ancient forms. Eternal practice, eternal refinement, never quite perfect but always improving. Liana stayed where she was for a few breaths. head slightly bowed, perfectly still, catching her breath or centering herself or just existing in that post-practice space where body and mind were aligned and quiet. Then she turned and walked toward Mara. The steps were soft but deliberate, her expression unreadable, that careful mask she wore in public, the one that hid whatever the Dragon Clan had taught her to hide. She stopped a few paces away, close enough to talk without raising her voice but far enough to maintain distance. Always distance with Lyanna, always that invisible barrier Mara could never quite cross, that wall that said this far and no further. I will come this close but not closer. I will give you this much but not more. Already making it your own, I see, Lyanna said, her tone halfway between pride and caution. Her dark eyes studied Mara's face, searching for something. Signs of strain, maybe, or corruption, or just confirmation that Mara was okay, that the snake hadn't consumed her completely. Mara managed a small, tired smile, the kind of smile that didn't reach her eyes but was all she had energy for. With monsters like Geralt walking around, she trailed off, voice cracking slightly on his name. The image flashed again: white suit, perfect hair, the gun rising smooth and practiced, the shot that ended a life like it was nothing. I really don't have a choice. The words came out more bitter than she intended, but it was true, wasn't it? She didn't have the luxury of taking her time, of learning at a safe pace. She needed to become strong fast, needed to master this snake, then before someone like Geralt decided she was a threat and needed eliminating. Before a crowd gathered to watch her burn, Lyanna's mouth tightened, her jaw worked like she was chewing on words she didn't want to say, grinding them up before they could escape. For a heartbeat, disgust flickered openly across her face, a sharp, raw, human emotion cutting through the mask she usually wore so carefully. Geralt, she said quietly, as if the name itself tasted like poison, like something rotten she had to spit out. He's a piece of shit. I don't understand how anyone can take another life so easily. The words were simple, blunt, but something in her voice carried weight, not personal history, but the kind of bone-deep revulsion that came from seeing someone cross a line that should never be crossed. A moral absolute broken so casually it shook her worldview. Mara wondered if Lyanna had killed anyone, if the Dragon Clan's training included that, if being nearly indestructible as she described her brother meant they had to learn how to fight, how to end threats permanently, if Lyanna's disgust came from personal experience, or just human decency. She didn't ask. Some questions were better left unspoken. Her words hung in the air like smoke, heavy and bitter. The morning breeze stirred them slightly but couldn't disperse them entirely. Mara didn't answer right away. She thought about the video again, the heat you could almost feel through the screen, making her phone warm to the touch, the way the pyromancer's scream had cut off mid-breath, turning into something wet and final, the stillness afterward, that terrible, suffocating stillness where the world stopped spinning for just a moment. Yeah, she murmured finally, the words scraping out of her throat like gravel. You were right about the Tai Chi, though. It helps. Lyanna gave a faint nod, some of the tension leaving her shoulders. It helps. Helps, Mara repeated, not sure if it was agreement or exhaustion or just the only word she could find. Her voice dropped to a whisper. I guess that's all we can ask for anymore. They stood there in silence for a moment, not the comfortable silence they used to share, when things were good, when they'd lie in bed together and just exist in the same space without needing to fill it with words, but not quite hostile either. Something in between, fragile, uncertain. The morning breeze stirred the mist that still lingered low over the grass, making it swirl around their ankles like living things. Some were far off, a siren wail and faded into distance, police or ambulance or fire truck racing to some disaster that would never make the news because there were too many disasters now, too much chaos to report at all. A reminder that peace was always temporary now, that every quiet moment was just the space between catastrophes. The eye of a storm that never ended. Then Lyanna exhaled, breaking the stillness. Starbucks. Mara blinked at her. The abrupt normalcy of the question almost made her laugh. Would have made her laugh if she had the energy for it. Two women standing in a park in a city that was falling apart, and one of them was asking about coffee like it was still 2019. And the worst thing they had to worry about was whether they wanted oat milk or almond milk. Like the world made sense and life was simple and people weren't dying in the streets for being different. Sure, she said, grabbing her bag and slinging it over her shoulder. The strap dug into her collarbone, a small discomfort that felt grand and real. I guess. They started walking down the narrow gravel path that led out of the park, the footsteps crunching softly on the stones. Each step sounded too loud in the morning quiet, intrusive. Birds stirred in the trees overhead, scattering as the two women passed beneath them. Their wings made soft whooshing sounds, and somewhere a crow called out harsh and grating, the kind of sound that always felt like a warning, like nature itself was trying to tell them something they weren't equipped to hear. Liana walked with easy confidence, hands tucked in her jacket pockets, her gaze scanning the quiet streets out of old habit, looking for threats, always looking. Her shoulders were relaxed but her eyes were sharp, tracking movement, noting exits, cataloguing potential dangers in the automatic way that came from years of training. Mara was only beginning to understand the kind of awareness that meant you'd survive things most people couldn't imagine, that meant you knew exactly how fast safety could turn into violence. Mara followed beside her but kept just enough distance that their sleeves didn't brush, that their hands wouldn't accidentally touch if they swung too close. A foot, maybe two, enough space that anyone watching would think they were just two acquaintances walking together, not whatever they were now, not quite friends, not quite strangers, not quite lovers, though the memory of that kiss still burned in both their minds. Something complicated and painful and unfinished. She told herself it was habit, that she was just being careful, maintaining boundaries like any reasonable person would after everything that had happened between them, after a year of silence and hurt and questions that had never been answered. She knew it was something else. No one else would have noticed the gap between them, but Liana did. Mara saw it in the way Liana's eyes flicked toward her once, twice, in the subtle stiffness that crept into her shoulders, in the way her hands pressed deeper into her pockets like she was physically stopping herself from reaching out, like she wanted to close that distance but didn't dare, didn't have permission, didn't know if it would be welcome. Neither of them said anything about it. They just kept walking, side by side but separate, as the morning sun climbed higher and burned away the last of the mist, leaving nothing but the hard, bright light of day. The Starbucks was crowded but quiet, the kind of hush that settled over city cafes mid-morning when everyone was too tired or too polite to make much noise. The air hummed softly with conversation, the steady whir of the espresso machine, and the clatter of mugs against saucers. Familiar sounds, comforting in their mundanity. Outside, cars passed in a rhythmic flow, their engines blending into the city's constant hum. A delivery truck backfired somewhere down the block, but in here it was muted, like sound moving through water. Mara and Liana sat across from each other at a small table near the window. Between them, untouched drinks cooled Mara's latte already forming a thin skin on top, Liana's tea sending up faint wisps of steam that twisted and dissipated in the air-conditioned space. The cafe was doing its best to pretend everything was normal. The menus still offered seasonal drinks, the baristas still drew hearts in the phone. The music playing overhead was the same bland, inoffensive pop it had always been, as if insisting hard enough on normalcy could make it real again. If not for the life and motion around them, the two could have been statues. Every sound, the hiss of milk steaming, the creak of chairs, the faint laughter from the counter where a group of college students clustered around someone's phone felt distant. In that stillness between them, even the drop of a pin might have sounded like thunder. Mara wanted to ask 1,000 questions. About the clans, about Liana's family, about what she'd been training for all those years, about why she really left, about whether there was any chance they could. Liana looked like she had 1,000 answers, and no intention of giving any of them. They held each other's gaze for what felt like an eternity, both of them waiting for the other to break first, playing chicken with emotions, with vulnerability, with the truth. It was Mara who finally spoke. Her voice came out low, almost hesitant, as if afraid to disturb the air between them. How long have you been awakened? And are there more families like yours? Liana's eyes flicked away for a moment, toward the window where sunlight spilled across the glass in golden sheets. She was quiet long enough that Mara wondered if she'd even answer, if this was one of those questions that violated the rules she'd mentioned. When she finally did speak, her tone was thoughtful, distant, like she was reaching back through years of memory. I don't really know, she said. Maybe kindergarten, maybe earlier. A faint, humorless smile touched her lips. My mother used to say I could hear the world breathing before I could walk. She stirred her tea absently with a wooden stick, not really watching what she was doing. The liquid swirled, catching the light. As for other families, yes, there are more, though it's hard to say how many. Most keep to themselves. Small, close-knit lines passing down what they know, rituals, meditations, ways of listening to the world. Then there are the main 12. There, she met Mara's eyes again. They're the biggest, the strongest, the ones who shape the balance when it starts to tip. Ancient families with thousands of years of history, bloodlines that go back to the beginning of recorded civilization and probably further. But most others, they're just people, hidden families scattered across the world. Old monks in monasteries that tourists never find. A few bloodlines that forgot what they were until the world started waking up again. Mara frowned, processing. You mean families like yours don't talk to each other? Liana shook her head. Rule 1. We don't talk about our world. It's how it's always been. Keep your power quiet. Keep your head down. And don't draw attention. Maybe it made sense when we were rare, when the awakened were 1 in a million, when revealing yourself meant persecution and witch hunts and being burned alive by people who feared what they didn't understand. She paused, her voice softening. Now they're everywhere, popping out of the woodwork. 3, 4, 5% of the population and climbing. The secrets are whether we wanted it out or not. For a while, they just listened to the sounds of the cafe, the hum of life that had somehow continued, while the rest of the world came apart at the seams, and Liana leaned forward slightly, lowering her voice until Mara had to lean in to hear her. You shouldn't be doing that form of Tai Chi in public. Mara blinked, surprised. What do you mean? If a non-awakened person watched you closely, really watched and kept practicing long enough, trying to copy what you're doing, Liana hesitated, choosing her words carefully, they could learn your power, maybe not perfectly, but close enough to imitate it. That's how legacy transmission works. It's not about teaching in the traditional sense, it's about resonance. If they align with your form long enough, watch how you move and breathe and channel ki. They'll start drawing from the same current you do. When they awaken, and these days they probably will, your form might become their power. Mara stared at her, the implications hitting like a physical blow. That's possible? Liana nodded slowly. It's your legacy now, Mara, whether you meant to claim it or not. That's yours. That's your inheritance, your signature, your mark on the world. That's why we're taught to guard our movements, our meditations. Power wants to be shared, wants to spread like any living thing, but it doesn't care who it goes to or what they'll do with it. She leaned back, her expression thoughtful. At least, that's what they always told me when I was learning. Never show your true form in public. Never practice where strangers can see. Someone might steal your legacy. Maybe it's superstition. Maybe it's just another way to remind us of Rule 1, keep the world small, keep it secret, protect what's ours. Her voice dropped to a murmur, because there are other families who'd take your gift if they could, train their children in it before they awaken, twist it into something it was never meant to be. You can only have one power after all, so they want their kids to have the best one, the strongest one, yours. The words lingered between them like a warning, like a threat, like a promise of violence to come. Mara looked down at her latte. The milk foam collapsing in slow motion, the heart pattern she hadn't noticed before dissolving into a shapeless swirl. A reflection wavered faintly in the surface, distorted and unfamiliar. She barely recognized herself anymore. She didn't know if she was ready to belong to any of the strange rules, hidden families, or the idea of a legacy she'd never asked for. She'd just been trying to survive, just been trying to not die in an alley, and now she was part of something thousands of years old. Something people would kill for, something that made her a target for reasons she barely understood. Outside, the light shifted as a cloud passed over the sun, throwing both women into a soft shadow. The temperature in the cafe seemed to drop slightly, or maybe that was just Mara's imagination. Neither moved. For the first time since the morning began, Mara realized how deep she'd fallen into a world that had always been there, waiting just below the surface, hidden in plain sight, masked by rules and secrecy and the assumption that magic wasn't real. And now there was no going back. She'd grabbed that crystal. Something had happened in the alley, something she still didn't fully understand. She'd become something other than human, and every day, every training session, every time she let the snake guide her movements, she was walking further down a path that had no return route. I'm scared, she said quietly. Not a confession she'd planned to make, but it slipped out anyway. Liana's expression softened. Good. Fear keeps you alive. It's when you stop being scared that you make mistakes. Is that what they taught you in the Dragon Clan? That's what I learned from surviving this long. Liana reached across the table, hand hovering halfway between them. An offer, an invitation. Not quite touching, but close enough that Mara could feel the warmth of her palm. Mara looked at the hand for a long moment. Then, slowly, she reached out and took it. Their fingers interlaced. Liana's hand was warm, calloused in unexpected places from training and practice. Real, solid, a connection that said you're not alone in this. Whatever comes, we'll face it together. The hiss stirred in Mara's chest, but this time it didn't screech in jealous rage. It just observed, watchful, patient, waiting to see what happened next. And for now, that was enough.